Castel Sant'Angelo is less a building than it is an architectural map of the evolution and history of the city as a whole. It began its existence as the tomb of the Emperor Hadrian and his family. On completion in 139 AD, it looked very different compared to today. If you look, you can see that the lower part of the central cylinder is very different to the upper part in terms of the materials that are used and its obvious age. The original building would have consisted of a large square base, and on top of that the cylinder, and on top of that a large mound of earth planted with cypress trees. Statues would have ringed the outside edge of the cylinder, and on top a quadriga statue of Hadrian in a chariot. Together with the mausoleum, Hadrian also had a bridge built to connect it to the city. The statues were added in the 16th century, but the bridge basically is still the Roman one. St. Peter's has since its initial construction been at the very center, first of the Christian and then of the Catholic faith. In large part, this is due to the Christian traditional belief that the remains of St. Peter himself lie buried under the very spot on which the altar now stands. And most of the symbolism, both in the construction and in the adornment of St. Peter's, is meant to accent exactly that point. It's there to reinforce the basis for papal authority over Christianity as a whole. Visiting Rome can be a bit numbing sometimes. Day after day, you can find yourself literally bowled over by spectacular ancient ruins like the Forum or the Colosseum. Well, I'm asking you, if at all possible, to shake off your history fatigue for just a while in honor of this building. The Pantheon is truly unique. Its monumental size is clearly visible from in front of the facade where you're standing now. But believe it or not, it'll become even more clear to you once you're inside. But what's really amazing about the Pantheon is that this building has been standing and in almost continuous use for around 2,000 years. There's almost no feat of imagination required of you. What you're seeing now is, with just a few differences, what an ancient Roman would have seen standing in the same spot some 2,000 years ago. The Pantheon is the closest thing that Rome has to a time machine. I suggest you start by wandering around a little underneath the columns just to get a feel for the size of it. The Piazza di Spagna has been at the heart of the foreigners' area of Rome since at least as far back as the 1600s. And if you're visiting it during the summer tourist season, I think you may well find that it still is today. We should probably begin with what the Romans call the Scalinata della Trinità dei Monti. They're known the world over as the Spanish Steps, and they were built in 1725, actually by the French. The original idea for the steps came from Cardinal Mazarin, an advisor to Louis XIV of France. The stairs were to connect, as they do now, the area of the Spanish embassy below with the French church of Trinità dei Monti at the top. Until the steps were built, the area was just a hillside planted with trees. But the construction plans ran into a diplomatic hurdle and were halted because of the French side's insistence on placing a large horseback statue of Louis XIV right at the top. The idea of the statue was flatly rejected by the Pope, and plans were shelved for nearly 100 years, after which they were finally built, but to an Italian design by the architect Francesco de Sanctis and without the offending statue. Piazza del Popolo is an incredible square. It grew up gradually over time, with all the individual elements of it being added bit by bit throughout the centuries, until at one point all these beautiful but disparate elements stood here like actors in need of a stage, each one amazing in its own right, but fairly unrelated to the other. Well, that stage was provided in 1820, when Giuseppe Valadier was commissioned to remodel the entire area into a single square. The result is one of the most beautiful and dramatic squares on the planet. Let's start by taking each one of these elements separately, and in order of age. The obelisk in the middle of the square is over 3,300 years old. It was originally in the Sun Temple in Heliopolis, one of the ancient capitals of Egypt, and it was brought here by the Emperor Augustus to celebrate the addition of Egypt to the empire after his defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Originally it stood in the Circus Maximus, but it was erected here by Pope Sixtus V in 1589. He ordered most of the obelisks of Rome to be re-erected. They'd all been toppled after the fall of the Roman Empire and was scorned by the Church for their pagan origins. It's the second highest obelisk in Rome at over 23 meters. At the opposite end of the square are the so-called twin churches, Santa Maria in Monte Santo on the left and Santa Maria dei Miracoli on the right. They were built in the late 1600s by the architects Carlo Rainaldi, Carlo Fontana and again Gian Lorenzo Bernini.